Welcome everybody to tonight's program, An Elmhurst Haunting. Just a little information before we get started. We are being joined by people on Zoom today. So we have some virtual viewers. So just for the people on Zoom, just to let you know, you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. So if you can put your questions in the chat, I'll raise my hand and ask Ray. Ray's happy to take questions throughout his presentation. Just raise your hand and he can take your question. We'll also do a question and answer portion at the end of the session. So welcome to Ray. Ray has over 30 years of lecturing and teaching experience on a variety of topics in the historical, law enforcement, and genealogical fields. He has also conducted guided tours of historical locations throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. Welcome, Ray.
All right, thanks. All right, just testing the mic. Can everyone hear this okay? Sure, okay. I can't hear it, so just let me know. Raise your hand if you can't hear me. Do you need it up a little bit? Can you hear me all the way in the back? All right, awesome. Okay, so yeah, so in the introduction, my name is Ray Johnson. I'm a retired criminal investigator from DuPage County. So I worked in West Chicago. We worked with Elmhurst and a lot of the other towns in DuPage County. I was part of a gang I spent most of my time in gang and narcotics, so it was a lot of fun. Was on the Major Crimes Task Force. I think the last murder they were investigated in Elmhurst, and is everyone here from Elmhurst? A lot of people. Was, and I don't even know if I made the news, but it was a guy who was playing Russian roulette with a bunch of teenagers. Oh, okay, okay, all right, you remember that. Okay, that's the last one I was involved with. We found the guy hiding up in a tree, of all places. So yeah, not the smartest tool in the shed, but anyway, so yeah, so got around, and then I've always been a big fan of Chicago history, even when I was younger, except for when I was in school. I hated it. So no offense to any history teachers, but history was just kind of boring to me. It was names, date, places. You really didn't care much about it. I mean, you learn about the Civil War and you're like, why do we need to learn this stuff? We all know which side won. So it didn't make any sense. But it wasn't until I started doing genealogy work on my own family that really kind of lit the history bug for me, because I started finding out I had ancestors who were in the Civil War. Oh, okay, I wish I would have paid attention in school. But then I wanted to know more about the Civil War, what battles he was in, he retired or not retired, but got a pension. And so I looked up all that stuff. So it was a lot of fun. And then, of course, I had found my mom's birth mom. She was adopted. I found out when I was 18 that she was adopted. And then we located her and we found out she had 15 brothers and sisters she never met. So it's been a lot of fun. So I think the last time I was looking at Elmhurst as a location because it has a really great history and a lot of ties with the city of Chicago, like a lot of the suburbs, and it had a lot of cool, weird kind of history, which I like, the stuff you don't typically read in history books. And so I started doing a tour. We just did it, I think, for 2 years. For 2 years, I had some friends who were paranormal investigators, and they went out to the different locations and were kind of looking at things, because I heard some spooky haunted stories of Elmhurst. And I like looking at urban legends and ghost stories from an investigator standpoint and doing the actual research behind it and finding out, how did it come about? Was there any truth to the story, type of thing? So I guess that's the natural investigator in me. And so I did that for the city of Elmhurst. We ran those tours for a couple of years, and I haven't done it in probably 10 years. So a lot of this program is going to cover just 2 locations on the tour. And then, as luck would have it, when I started working with veterans in January at the DuPage County Courthouse, I became the Vet Mentor Coordinator. So I'm doing fundraising for the Vet Mentor program that works along with veterans that find themselves in the justice system. And it just so happened that I'm doing a tour. I'm resurrecting the tour I did 10 years ago for one night this Saturday, and we brought some flyers in case anyone's interested in that, which will cover more than what this talk will. It's going to be like an hour and a half, 2-hour walking tour in Elmhurst. So, all right, so let's get started with Haunted Elmhurst. Anyone know what building this is? Wilder Mansion, right? I just like the way it looks for the cover slide. We will talk about it. So what people now consider the Wilder Mansion didn't start that way. It was built by a gentleman named Seth Wadhams, and we'll get into that in a second. But I'd heard stories about it being haunted, and like most old buildings, they kind of have stories that come about. And I started reaching out to people who claimed that the Wilder Mansion was haunted. Now, a lot of them were former and current librarians because, as you're probably aware, the Wilder Mansion was the Elmhurst Library for a long time until they built this building. So in talking to some people, there were both former and current librarians mentioned seeing a female. So everyone that mentioned seeing something at the library all mentioned a female. And then in this particular case, they mentioned a woman in period dress walking up the stairs and disappearing on the second floor, as well as items. A lot of librarians say we have a mischievous ghost because things are being moved around, books are being reshelved in the wrong place. Now, that could just be a new librarian who doesn't know what they're doing. But for the most part, no one was really afraid of the spirit. And on one of the tours, I met a woman who said when she was a child and she was doing research at the library on World War II, she was sitting there reading a book, and a woman who was dressed as though she was dressed from the late 1800s just sat next to her and asked her what she was reading. And she thought it was a little strange, but she seemed as real as you and I. And she asked her, "What are you reading?" And when she looked back down at the book to open it up and show her the cover, she looked back and she was gone. So it was just kind of strange. So I was kind of looking into the history of the Wilder Mansion to see if there's any reason why a female would possibly be haunting the location. So going back to when it was built. So it was built by the Wadhams family. Seth Wadhams was born in 1812 in Goshen, Litchfield, Connecticut. He actually was he belonged to the settlers, Chicago Old Settlers Society, where you had to be there in Chicago before it became a city. So he actually came to Chicago in 1835 when it was a town. So it was the town of Chicago before it was the city of Chicago. It became the city of Chicago in 1837. So he was a real estate speculator. He owned a lot of property in Chicago and also a merchant. So he started selling things in Chicago and started making a lot of money, like a lot of the people that were coming here early. He went back to Connecticut to marry Elizabeth Reed McKinney, and they were married in Connecticut in 1849. And they moved back here to Chicago after he got married, brought Elizabeth to Chicago, and they had 3 children. They had a daughter named Emma, who was born in 1850, Dana, who was their son, born in 1852, and they adopted a boy from New York named Frederick Eugene Holland, and he was born January 26, 1853. And a lot of these names are going to be coming back as we go through the history of the Wadhams family. Now, while he was here, he owned a number of different companies. He was a board member of a bank, the Treasury Bank in Chicago. He was a member of the United States Roofing Company, which had a lot of business after the Chicago fire. So a lot of buildings being remade. So a lot of the businesses were basically construction and architectural firms. He did form the Wadhams and Willard Ice Company in 1858 before the fire. And he continued with that until he basically stepped out of it. His partner was Alonzo Willard, which you see here. And then it became the Washington Ice Company, and then it combined with a bunch of other ice companies and became what a lot of people may recognize the Knickerbocker Ice Company. So the Wadhams and Willard was the original company. He also foiled a bank robbery at the bank that he was a board member of. So in 1867, he just happened to be visiting the bank. It was starting to close up. It was getting close to closing time. And he sees this person standing at the teller window, just reaches over and grabs an envelope full of money and takes off. So he chases the person down for a couple blocks, tackles him. The police show up, the guy gets arrested. So he had $900, which was a lot of money back in 1867. So he actually caught a guy stealing from his own bank. So, which was kind of cool. Now, unfortunately, in 1858, his son dies of dysentery. So dysentery, if you're not familiar with what it is usually a disease that you get from drinking poor quality water, which we had a lot of in Chicago at the time. So before they reversed the flow of the Chicago River, all the sewage and everything went out into Lake Michigan. And if you realize the water crib is out in Lake Michigan, so all the sewage just got pumped right back into the city, into the drinking water. So it was a big problem in the 1800s with that going on until they reversed the flow of the river. And then the river went out to the suburbs, making all the suburbs angry that all the garbage from Chicago was going west. But his son died on August 3rd, 1858, was only 6 years old. And then they purchased a location in Elmhurst called Burnham's Lot. So a lot of the people, the richer people from Chicago were buying land and building homes out west outside the city. And so they purchased Burnham's Lot, which didn't have any buildings on it back in 1858, and they built Whitebirch, is what they called it, which is basically the predecessor of the Wilder Mansion. It didn't have the wings yet, so they just had the center part of the building. This was circa 1880 photograph from the Elmhurst Historical Museum. Now, because Dana had died, his wife Elizabeth, Seth's wife Elizabeth, was very depressed. And so he built a greenhouse for her to grow plants. Only the greenhouse, the original greenhouse, is actually behind the conservatory which exists now at the Wilder Mansion. So if you're used to seeing the conservatory as you're driving past the Wilder Park, the original greenhouse that Elizabeth used was actually still connected and behind the conservatory. There's also a friendship walk, if you're not familiar with it, where Elizabeth had a friend named Elizabeth Case, who was the wife of Seth Wadhams' childhood friend. And they lived just a short distance away from the Wadhams at Whitebirch, so she made this path that connected both of the homes. And so now they call it Elizabeth's Friendship Walk. Now the story kind of takes a weird turn. So Emma, their oldest daughter, who is now 20 in 1870 before the Chicago fire, she's encouraged by her dad to marry an architect from Chicago named Ed Loring. She didn't want to marry him, but the father convinced her eventually in 1870 to do it. Now, after they married, they moved to Peoria. And then without her father knowing, she divorces Ed Loring and marries another guy named Walter R. Colton, who is also an architect. And it was probably a pretty good idea to divorce Ed Loring because he filed for bankruptcy in 1878. So there was something going on there. But the dad was really mad because back then, if you wanted to divorce the husband that your dad hooked you up with, it would be, you know, the right thing to do to say, hey, Dad, I'm going to divorce this guy. Now, he wouldn't have approved of it anyway, which is probably why she didn't tell him. But when she did it, she visited the home, told him later on, after she married Walter Colton, that it had happened. And he said, you know what? Leave here. You'll never come back. You'll never darken my doorway again. And he wrote her off. That was it. So she left that day, never came back. Now, he was feeling a little guilty about that, and Elizabeth probably was giving him a hard time because they already lost one of their kids, and now their older daughter is now missing somewhere. They couldn't find her. Seth actually had a change of heart and attempted to locate Emma using private detectives, but had no luck. So she was traveling, she was moving around, they didn't know where she went. And then Elizabeth dies. So Elizabeth dies in 1882 on July 9th. So she dies never knowing what happened to her daughter, Emma. And then after that, Seth Wadhams passes away in 1888, not long after his wife. So he got sick, moved out to California, San Diego, to try to get, usually it's some breathing type of thing. They move out to California and then tried to get better, but didn't. He died in San Diego in 1888. By all accounts, he was a broken man, but he had a large estate. So he had a lot of money that accumulated over the years. I think it was worth about $500,000. So back then, that was a lot of money. All right, so after Seth Wadhams passes away, in his will, he mentions in his will that he wants to sell the property to Aurelia Case, who was the daughter of John R. Case, who was his childhood friend. So in his will, he said, I'm willing to sell you this property and you can purchase it for $20,000, which they did. She married Henry King, who was a manufacturer of clothing. So he had a lot of money in Chicago as well. Now, after Mrs. King passed in 1901, the estate was sold to a Mrs. Henry Gordon Selfridge, who they themselves then sold it in 1905 to Thomas Wilder. And that's where the Wilder Mansion comes in. He was the last owner before he actually more or less willed the property to the city of Elmhurst after he passed away. Now, the strange case of Dr. Fred Wadhams. So you remember we talked about the boy that they adopted. Well, he actually grew up and became a doctor. So and of course, this is around the same time as H. Holmes became a doctor. So I think it was a little easier to become a doctor back in the 1800s than it is now. So that's Fred there on the right. And he had an interesting life. So he marries his first wife, Marie Shearding from Palatine. Then they lived in New York for a while and had 3 children, Jenny, Wanda, and Earl. In 1897, Fred's first wife finds him with his soon-to-be second wife, Marie Heimstreet, who is the president of the Anti-Vice Society, in a room at the Palmer House. So the first wife finds him with another woman at the Palmer House. She gets ticked off, moves out west. Of course, when she's out there, she ends up putting all the money. Now, Fred inherited about $100,000 of the $500,000 that Seth Wadhams had. And the rest of the money he gave to charity, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But in 1898, his first wife dies out west in Arizona. So she dies, only when he tries to get the money, he can't because it's in the kids' names, because when she died, it was in trust. So then there's this big court battle between him and the family of his first wife, who now have his children. And so it got to be a real mess. And it's kind of funny that the woman he was cheating with was president of the Anti-Vice Society of Chicago, which is pretty hilarious. Now it only gets better, because his second wife, the one he was in the Palmer House with, is a complete nutcase. And she is a very violent woman. And in 1911, Fred's second wife finds him cheating with a countess. So he's got this medical office in Elmhurst, and she gets really ticked off, says, so she just goes out. First, the newspaper said that she whipped the woman with a horsewhip in the middle of the street, drug her out in the middle of the street, and then whipped her on the street, leaving her bloodied and bashed. But she said she only used the horsewhip because the umbrella that she started to beat her with broke. Now in 1912, so Seth is long gone. He's donated his money. Fred is dealing with his second wife, who's crazy, or maybe not crazy, but maybe he drove her crazy. Who knows? The newspaper said she was kind of crazy, and again, there's a whole bunch of other things as well, but we don't need to get into that. But so in 1912, a 62-year-old woman shows up at the Chicago Old People's Home. So she comes to the Old People's Home, she checks in, she's looking for money, she has no money. Her husband actually is in Michigan for some reason. She goes up, she signs in her name, and her name is Emma Wadhams Green. And the person at the Old People's Home goes, wait a second, Wadhams, that sounds familiar. And they're like, wait, he donated like $20,000 to the Old People's Home in his will. And so we're willing to give you like $1 a month or whatever to live on. And she went, I don't think so. So she turns around, hires a lawyer. So remember, she's still an heir, even though she's not mentioned in the will. So, and he really cut her off. I mean, the will doesn't mention her. His obituary doesn't mention her as a daughter. So it was bad news. So she hires an attorney. So the attorney sues the Old People's Home because in the will, the $20,000 was supposed to be used to build a home for only single white American-born males. So pretty specific. So they never built the home. They just put the money in the bank and collected interest on it from 1888 until now. So basically, like I said, this is Seth Wadhams' obituary. It says in the obituary that he had no children of his own, which wasn't true. But many years ago, adopted two sons, one who's a doctor, and then the other is not engaged. So I don't know where they were getting this information, but Dana had died at the age of 6. Fred was a doctor, and he did have a daughter, Emma, but was never mentioned in any of the obituaries or even in his will. So in 1913, Dr. Fred dies. Now, I didn't research Fred and how he died, given the fact that his wife was not happy with him. Although it would be kind of interesting to look up his death certificate and see what he actually died of. But he dies in 1913. And then in 1915, Emma files suit in 1912. 1950, Emma finally wins her suit and now the money that was given to the old person's home at $20,000 in 1888 is now worth $86,000. So she comes here with no money, shows up at the old person's home, and walks out with 86,000. Now, the Wadhams family is buried at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. So it's hard to read. It's a granite stone. It's not really well carved, but you can make the names out when you're actually standing there looking at it. But it's Seth, Elizabeth, and Dana, the young son, are buried alongside this monument. Now, Emma Green's husband came back from Michigan. Once she got the money, he comes back from Michigan. She buys a plot at Graceland Cemetery, not by her family, and puts up a really nice stone for her husband who died in 1917. And then she is actually buried in an unmarked grave next to her son, Bob Colton. So her second husband, the Walter R. Colton, who later died, they had a son named Bob Colton. So he has a gravesite next to Emma at the cemetery. He died in 1892. So if you're looking for, in my opinion, if there's a female that's haunting the Wilder Mansion, and my guess it would be Emma, only because she was never allowed in the house when she left in 1870. And now it's kind of like her way of saying, you know, I'm back in the house. What are you going to do about it? And Seth is probably spinning like this over in Graceland somewhere. So, all right. Any questions on the Wilder Mansion or the Wadhams family?
What does the donated to the city of Elmhurst to allow for where it's being used for now?
It was, now going back, it would be in my notes. I'm just doing this by memory. So it was 1919, I believe. No, it was 1923, I believe, when the property was, I think it was the northernmost part of the park was donated to the city. And then the southern part became the library. And then, but they said, but in his will, he wanted it to build a separate library, not to use the mansion as the library. So it wasn't until I believe the 1940s when they actually sold the northernmost property, so the city had the money to build a new library, but the new library wasn't even built until I think, was it 2003? I think this building was built. So yeah, so it was kind of a juggling of property that started in 1923 and then ended up, you know, finally being built in 2003. So, all right. So one of the other locations that I thought was really interesting was, now this is an older photo. Obviously, this was taken 10 years ago when I was doing the tours. Now it's Elmhurst University, which is pretty cool. Before it was Elmhurst College. So we're going back ways. And that's the haunting of the Elmhurst Mill Theater and Scene Shop. Is anyone familiar with this story at all? No? I wasn't either until I had a friend who went to Elmhurst College back when it was Elmhurst College, and he was in the theater program, and he contacted me and said, you got to look into this Scene Shop because everyone says it's haunted. So I said, okay, fine. So this is a picture of the haunted Scene Shop at 251 Walter Street in Elmhurst. So it's not very far from here at all. I don't know if you remember seeing it driving past it, but this is the Scene Shop. So this is where they build the props and the scenery for theater productions. Just adjacent to it, and which used to be a single building, is where the actual theater part is. Prior to this, they had all their theater productions in the gymnasium at Elmhurst College. So they actually the college purchased this property from the Hammerschmidt and Franzen Mill Company. So the Hammerschmidt and Franzen Company is older actually than the city of Elmhurst. And the original building was located on the north side of the northwestern tracks, just west of Addison Avenue. And then they purchased it, the college purchased it from the Mill and Administrative Offices in 1967. And back then, those two buildings were a single building. So they had like cut out the middle section of the building to make a pathway between the two. So this is a picture of the Scene Shop at night. It's pretty spooky. They always keep the lights on the second floor, and I don't know if they still do that. I was going to drive past it on my way here, and I didn't, but I'll probably drive past it on the way out. And they always used to keep Christmas decorations in the second floor window, and I thought that was a little strange. I mean, they were up there all year long. So when I started talking to people about, you know, he had actually, this friend of mine who went to Elmhurst College put me in touch with people who claimed that it was haunted, so I could talk to them and kind of get an idea of why they thought it was. So one current 10 years ago, she's graduated, I'm sure by now, cannot stay in the scene shop alone due to a feeling of impending doom or dread. Now you'll see when we took some pictures on the inside, and you'll see why anyone that was in the scene shop at night would feel like an impending doom or dread, because it's just a spooky building, because they have mannequins and leftover props, and so it's kind of like being in a magic shop. Now, the director of the Communications Arts and Sciences, Alan Weiger, he was a skeptic. I did talk to him because he told me he knew the original story of the haunting and where it comes from, and he's the only one that knew. So, and I'll tell you what he told me in a minute. But now he's a skeptic. He doesn't believe in ghosts, but he said when he's in the building at night, he'll hear heavy objects being slid across the floor above his head, and he doesn't know how to explain it. So while he doesn't believe in ghosts, he does remember hearing footsteps and things being moved around when nobody is there. Now, a male theater alum claimed to have been in the upper floors of the scene shop and repeatedly saw a dark figure moving around. When he approached it, it would disappear. And he believed it to be a spirit of a man who was killed in the 1970s. Now, in the theater itself, I've heard people say they hear a little girl laughing. I've never been able to find anything when it was a mill about a little girl that was killed, or even either inside or directly outside of the building. So I'm not sure where that comes from. But a lot of people believe it has something to do with the building when it used to be a mill. Now, this is a picture of Alan Weiger back in 1970. I don't know if anyone knows him at all. Okay. He'd probably be mad I'm showing old pictures of 1970. But he was a student in the theater program going back to 1970. And the story he told me goes like this. So they were getting ready for what they called their interim term. So when it was a college, they had a shortened term that took place over Christmas time. And so it was only like 8 weeks long or 6 weeks long, something like that. So they still had a full class schedule, but they had to compress it into a short period of time around the Christmas break. And so the theater group was no different. So they were getting ready to do a light opera called The Marriage of Figaro, was what they were doing. And so the property, what they call them, the property director, I guess, was working with the students to build the scenery for it. And then they had to break for Christmas. And then the idea was when they got back off Christmas break, then they would hit the ground running and get ready for the production. So they all break for Christmas break. They all come back from Christmas break. And one of the students goes into the scene shop and sees the director standing at the top of the stairs. So he goes to him to get their marching orders for the day. And he sits down with them and he gives them the plans and tell them who's going to be doing what and what's going to be going where. And then he brings the drawings downstairs to the rest of the class and said, I was just upstairs with the director and he showed me where everything was going. And they said, you mean David? And he said, yeah, David. And he goes, there's no way you were up there with David because he died over Christmas break. And that was the story that Alan Weiger told me. So of course I had to find out, how much of that was true and where it came from. And so I did a little research. This is the stairs where supposedly the student had followed David Payne up to the second floor of the scene shop. And these are the stairs he would walk back down if he was going to talk to the students. So when I went to Elmhurst College to do research, I went back to supposedly it happened around 1970. So I went back through some of the old magazines and whatnot. And I find there is a David Payne who was an instructor at the time. So David Payne was mentioned in the summer of '68 edition of the school magazine. David John Payne, he was a new instructor in speech, and he was from Michigan, graduated from Eastern Michigan University. Then I looked at specifically the theater groups around the time, and sure enough, during the interim term, they were doing The Marriage of Figaro. So that checked out as well. So obviously Alan Weiger did not claim to be the student who talked to David Payne. He just remembers the story. So it happened shortly before he either got there or he was there when it happened. So it was The Marriage of Figaro. Now there is one single photo of David Payne I was able to find, and that's the picture on the upper right, and that's him carrying a lot of the wood. So a lot of the stuff he was doing was very physical. So he was helping build the scenery, and that's David Payne right there. So then I did a little work on David Payne, and I was looking at some of the old Elmhurst newspapers from 1969, and it mentions David Payne remembered. So in other words, David Payne had died, because I couldn't find any record of David Payne dying in Illinois. And so I thought it was a little suspicious that I couldn't find anyone named David Payne who died between 1968 and 1970. But then I saw in the Elmhurst, students remembered David Payne. So obviously he did die. And in fact, in one of the yearbooks, it mentions in memory of David John Payne, 1943 to 1968. So then I did a little research on David Payne in Michigan, since I knew he graduated from Michigan University. I did reach out, and I found his grave marker at Hillside Cemetery in Bellevue, Michigan. And I did find the funeral director that handled his funeral, and they were nice enough to send me the records from the funeral and also the burial. And on the funeral records, it mentions that he was an instructor at Elmhurst College, and he died on Christmas Day, 1968. And this is his burial. He died of a fracture and dislocation of his neck. So he was walking along the roadway at night, and a car hit him and took off. So yeah, so he was killed in a car accident on Christmas Day, during Christmas break, during the production of The Marriage of Figaro. So everything Alan Weiger told me was true. Now, so these two friends of mine who were, or I don't think they're still doing it, but they were paranormal. They used to go ghost hunting. And so they would make recordings and take videos and stuff like that. So they're given access to the scene shop, and they walked around. This is actually a photo from the inside of the scene shop at night. So you can see what kind of a creepy place this is at night. And they were talking with one of the students, and they're kind of recording things that are going along. And this was one of the recordings where they hear actually a female laughing, but none of them were laughing in the original conversation. So I just wanted to play that for you, the recording they made.
Technical director of some kind.
Yeah.
He died,
Mhm.
and he lives here.
Okay, that's what we've been told. David
Right.
Payne is his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So supposedly none of them were laughing when they had this conversation. You can easily hear a woman laughing, which was kind of strange. Now, the scarier one is when there was a full-size mirror sitting in the scene shop, and they were both talking to the person about how full-size mirrors are creepy, and a lot of people say that spirits can somehow transfer themselves into these full-size mirrors, and especially this old one that was in the scene shop that looked like it was an old full-size mirror. So they were talking about the mirror, and this is what they hear.
Technical director.
Not bad. Oh, hold on, go back. It's hard to make out, but it sounds like he owns you. Nope. It's not working right. See, they're messing with my audio now. They're ticked off. That was the best one. Usually gets people freaked out because it basically say he owns you, but it sounds a lot worse than that. Let me go back. Ah, no, stop it. There we go. Let's see if it works this time. It doesn't turn out. Well, it worked right before you got here. So I knew this was going to happen. This happened at one of my Resurrection Mary talks. I talk a lot about Resurrection Mary, and she messed up the complete end of my presentation. So it was bound to happen. I know. Forward. See? There we go. Nope. Maybe I'll play it off the computer when we're finished. So those are the two locations that we're going to talk about haunted Elmhurst tonight. Now, any questions about the scene shop or the theater?
Historically, what happened to the actual mill that had been there? Like you said that it was there before the city of Elmhurst came.
Right.
Is there a huge history to it?
Right. The mill itself isn't as old as the Hammerschmidt Franz and Company, but the scene shop was where the paper mill was, and their administrative offices were in the shallow the shorter building, which is now the theater. So, but I couldn't, and I knew it was a mill because I looked it up at the Elmhurst Historical Society, and like I said, once it was shut down, the college bought it to be their new theater, where they were going to rehab it to a theater. I could not find anyone that was killed in an industrial action or a mill anywhere in and around that theater. So the only thing I could point to was the story Alan told me about David Payne.